Mindful Coach podcast. So welcome to this edition of the Mindful Coach podcast. I'm your host, Britt Hill. And this week we have a really special guest, Owen Marcus. Owen's journey into emotional wellness and founding MELD, which is the Men's Emotional Leadership Development Organization, began unexpectedly in 1995 when he started his very first men's group. And that path led him to write a book, even appear in a documentary, and launch both a nonprofit and initiatives like Every Man and now MELD. These ventures are dedicated to helping men pursue personal growth through science-based, community-oriented practices. And over 3 decades, he's created a powerful way for men to develop relational skills using the body's natural physiological responses. So much to talk about with you, Owen, so welcome to the show.
It's an honor to be here.
Well, I'm just delighted to have you here to talk about your journey and specifically also the journey, in a way, kind of like a placeholder for men in the world trying to connect to the issues and a better life being men in our culture, in our world. So tell us a little bit about how you wound up with that as your focus.
I certainly didn't intend to. I graduated college, was traveling, ended up in Boulder, Colorado. I had a roommate that was an attorney to giving up his law practice of 8 years to move out to Boulder to learn how to be a Rolfer. And Rolfing
Wow.
is a kind of body therapy where you're getting rid of chronic stress, realigning the structure by working with the soft tissue. And Brett argued his case really well. I said, all right. After a couple of weeks, I'll just try it. If you promise to shut up, I'll try it. And I got hooked. I spent 4 years in Boulder learning Rolfing, learning the psychosomatic therapies, learning mindfulness, everything that Boulder had to offer. I was sucking it up. And then in 1980, I moved down to Scottsdale or Phoenix, Arizona, started a Rolfing practice that became an integrated medical clinic. Did a lot of things, worked with a lot of elite athletes, studies, media. And then I realized I healed a lot with myself, my body, a lot of my Asperger's, my dyslexia, my tight body, my uptightness. But my relationships really weren't where I wanted them to be, particularly, with partners or women. And I saw that I was a consistent variable and I needed to do something about it. And I thought, well, maybe, doing a men's group or something like that would be good. And I'm not going to do that. That's weird. I go,
Right. Who wants to do a men's
that's
group?
weird stuff. I'm not doing that.
How unmanly is that?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not, I'm a man. I don't do that. Well, I go, well, if I have so much resistance, maybe I should look into it. And did a little training, ended up starting a men's group out of my clinic. It was mediocre, but it was enough to get me intrigued. I left Phoenix, moved to Northern California for a year, helped start the first real men's group in Sonoma and Napa County. That was a great group. That inspired me. Moved to North Idaho. I did a few little groups. And then 20 years ago, almost to this day, I redesigned the model for men's groups and with that men's work based on mindfulness, somatic mindfulness, the connection of the body, emotions, all the things I sort of studied and was using in my clinic. I adapted to, working with men. I go, I don't know if other guys are going to go for this. They did. And that group is still going strong today. We've had over 500 guys in that group. We have currently over 60 guys in the group. We have 5 groups, and I'm in a Zoom group for some of the expats. And we've had a film done on us and many more things happen out of that, including 3 businesses. And over those 20 years, I've really honed this model of how to work with men and teach them, but really give them back the skills that are buried in them or that they should have had taught to them and never had taught to them.
Wow. So, excuse me. So I have 2 questions that come up for me. One is like, you started off and you said, well, I really wasn't very good, but then you kept doing it. It's like, was there some point where you felt like this is really valuable and I need to up my game here and do more? What was it that kind of, helped you come to the conclusion that, yeah, I want to keep doing this and I want to do more of it?
When I started this other group 20 years ago, I invited 11 guys. They all said yes. I said, wow, I got to show up. And I did, and they kept on showing up. So I kept on developing this and models and everything else. And they just soaked it up. And, I started training guys. And after, I don't know, 5 years or so, the word got out and people were coming to us, and really me, and going, can you train me? Can you train my group? And so I
Mhm.
started traveling throughout North America and training guys. And then I go, well, I guess it's a business here. So I started a part-time business, and then I was a co-founder in Everyman, started that business and developed all the trainings, led all the trainings, and that was my part of the business. And the business went sideways, so I just took all my material and all my men, my key guys, and left and started this new company just over a year ago.
I see. Okay, so how's that going?
Great. In one way, we're starting over because it's a new company, and we had a lot of publicity that we got from the work I created.
Hmm.
So I don't have that directly associated with this new company, but I have a personal reputation and a lot of contacts with
Yeah, and a
a
lot,
lot of the top therapists in the country that are sending us people.
well, that helps.
Yeah, it does.
So, how is it then that the work that you're doing, you're saying it's like physiologically informed, and so what does that mean? Like, how is that different than like some other kind of support group?
Well, there's a lot of kinds of support groups, and I've volunteered over the decades of doing all the things I have done and spoken at them. And then we got the 12-step groups. So what's unique is that, we create, in terms of groups, an emotionally safe space, which is like the basic requirement. And then we work with and we help train men to work with this model of getting connected to their somatic experience. This is where the mindfulness comes in,
So,
particularly
what is some
somatic
just for our
mindfulness.
listeners? What does somatic experience mean?
So you know what mindfulness is, if you're listening
Yeah.
to this podcast. Somatic, comes from the root soma, which means body. So anything oriented to the body. So others talk about somatic therapy. And there's really two kinds of somatic therapies. There's somatic body therapies, which is like body work, and Rolfing's one of them. And then
Hmm.
there's somatic psychotherapies like Hakomi, somatic experience, and many others that are really taken off in the last 5 years. So anything associated with the body, and they all sort of make the body mind or body emotional connection.
The body mind body emotional connection. So let's fill that in a little bit. How is it that, like, okay, I've got a body part and it's feeling a certain way. How's that connected to emotions?
We've been trained in this culture thanks to the Catholic Church, this whole sort of dualistic model that, I think, therefore I am, and that, our existence is a mental, cognitive phenomena. That's part of it, but
Hmm.
it's not all of it. And so what we're working with, I think in mindfulness in general, particularly with what we do with men, is getting them connected to what their body's experiencing. So Stephen Porges, who we've had on our program, and he's the man that developed polyvagal theory. Sounds real
Yeah.
complicated, but essentially what it means is this big nerve, the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, the biggest nerve of our body. 80% of the nerve flow goes this way, from your gut to your head, or really from
Hmm.
your body, your heart, your lungs, your throat, your face, and into your brain. And so what that essentially means is that what he calls neuroception, that we start to feel our body and what our body's response is, and either unconsciously or consciously, it's telling us, first, are we safe? That's the first thing
Right.
it's telling us, and telling other people, because they're reading our nonverbals. So we're
Yes,
having this
exactly.
nonverbal rapport without often even knowing about it. So as you become more mindful, you actually become more aware of your neuroception. What's your body saying? And so one of the big things was sort of a joke when I had my clinic, was guys would come in, they go, oh, my back hurts. I go, yeah, I know your back's tight, but that's going to be easy. It's your neck and your
Rolfer. Yeah,
shoulders.
that's the easy stuff.
It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. So after a few sessions, their back is like, oh, my back hasn't been this good in 20 or 30 years. Wow. But you got to work on my neck and my shoulders. It's killing me. And I go, do you remember what I said in the beginning, how they were tightening? Yeah. Well, here's the deal. They were chronically tight from stress, from you holding them up, and they were so tight, you were disconnected from it. You were disassociated. And then as your body relaxed, you became more aware of your body. And the first thing you became aware of was the tension in your shoulder. And that, it's like your fists were always clenched. And suddenly you start to realize it and you go, my hand's tight. Well, the same with your shoulders. And then I said, this is good. Good? Yes, it's good. Because negative feedback, because you're going to teach yourself the only way you're not going to feel tightness or pain in your shoulders is to learn to relax them, which means you're going to be relaxing your whole body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what you're saying is like learning to pay attention to what's going on, like your actual tension, your actual experience. There's a deeper connection there that, it's like, I guess it sort of begs the question of like, why is it tense your whole life? Like what's going on with people that they don't notice that earlier? And particularly, I think, with men in this country.
Well, we get into the physiology of stress, particularly trauma. And so all mammals, we have three choices. And we all know about fight or flight. When we're in survival, we're going to do one of the two. Now, more and more people are realizing from what Peter Levine, the developer of Somatic experience, taught me. He was one of the, a Rolfer like I was back in like 1980. I'll never forget the day he was teaching us that there's a third option. And so when a mammal can't fight or flee, they freeze. And so when I had my house in the woods of North Idaho, I had a meadow in front of my house, and there'd be deer there. And then, so if one of the local cougars came down and took down a deer, but wasn't hungry and didn't want to eat the deer, it would leave. And a few minutes later, the deer would stand up, tremble, literally shake off the stress of trauma and run away. That deer had no PTSD, but because we've had trauma and what I call micro traumas or stressful events that did not allow for us to physiologically release the stored tension and that freeze response, because in the freeze response, which is like a shock state, we outwardly look relaxed or dead, or, that's a survival response. But internally, our nervous system is still wound up. Adrenaline, or cortisol, all is running through us. And we literally need to shake it off or it's going to stay in us. And so what happens over time is we continue to disconnect, disassociate, which is what happens in the freeze response. So we don't feel it, which is one of the initial benefits of the freeze response. But it goes into our soft tissue. And the guy that wrote the book on stress is a physician named Hans Selye. 50 years ago, he called fascia, which is a connective tissue that Rolfers work on, which holds everything together, is the organ of stress. And so you can have a blunt force trauma, and you've had a scar tissue, and we'd all expect that. But I'll tell you that most of our tension in our body is more stress or emotionally related. But the same thing happens. We end up getting tighter and tighter in that soft tissue. The fascia becomes, goes from supple, soft, stretchy sort of leather to shoe leather. And we literally store our emotions in our body. Now, we have a certain mental analog with it, but when the body starts to release its hold, it starts to release the charge and the emotion, and it could go the other way. We really have a true emotion release, we're going to have a physiological change. And so that's the interface that we work with men, is changing that chronic response. So we get rid of some of the chronic stress, but we also teach that body and that man to not replicate it. So under a stressful situation, how to stay present, how to stay relaxed so that they're able to connect with people, and with that feel safe.
Right. So that's a key thing you ended there with that feel safe. There's a lot in kind of underlined in that particular piece. It seems like, in my experience with my own clients and my own men's groups that I've been parts of, there's a lot about once you start to kind of look inside, it's almost like you don't feel safe doing that. That there's like, oh my God, there's a lot going on here, and I'd almost rather not be in contact with that. So how do you help people kind of negotiate that?
I think that's a good question. I think that's a function of a few things, because you start to slow down, sort of like my little story of the shoulders. You start to feel your body, and you start to feel the tensions there. and that starts to activate you. You start to feel uncomfortable. But the other part of that is, particularly for men, we start to feel an emotional experience, and then all those old tapes of, being vulnerable as being weak, showing your emotions as being a wimp. I mean, all these things that are sort of embedded in us starts to get activated. And so, a guy even thinks about feeling something, and he's scared. He doesn't know what to do with it because, he's been trained to hold it and at least not show it. So one of the great things about our groups, and you probably have in your groups, is that we create this emotionally safe space. And when I do these trainings, one of the first things I say is, we're changing the rules of engagement. And in this situation, you get honored for your ability to be vulnerable. And inevitably what happens is some guy takes a risk. He shows everyone that it's okay to be vulnerable. And then they all start being vulnerable. And then some of them get competitive. Well, I can be more vulnerable.
Right. And that becomes a new identity in a way. It's kind of
exactly.
like the most vulnerable guy in the room.
Yeah. I'm tougher than you because I can be more vulnerable.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to take you down with my vulnerability.
It almost gets like that, and guys get really supportive, and then we make it safe. They see it safe. And then, a guy says something and he says, that was just like me and my father. And that brings something up. So you get the reciprocal of what we have out there of shutting everything down to guys start talking. It starts really opening things up. And, they feel their bodies, they feel their emotions, and they feel their connections. All the three things that generally as men, we do not have.
So how do you get guys, how is it that guys come to you and they're interested in this? Because like you say, the stereotypical kind of meme for men is kind of like, quell your emotions, don't show weakness, take no prisoners, be the Superman, persevere, just, so what if your place is a catastrophe, you power through, because at the end of the day, you've got to be the king of the hill at all costs, and I sometimes get pretty unhappy because what I call a Superman mentality is like, we even, in business, it's kind of like, you've got to work hard, you've got to do more than everybody else around you. And, if you're going to dominate and crush the competition, and, that there's a plus to that. And then the flip of that is like, well, I don't want to be put, to use the popular vernacular these days, a snowflake and kind of cower every time I have a feeling and so there's this, neither one of those are clearly, obviously healthy models, but that's kind of what's rattling around out there, it seems like.
You're right. Yeah, right on with that. And we got the hyper and hypo masculine model, and it's we're set up in a duality, which in any duality, it's a no-win or a catch-22 situation. And so what I say, there's a third point, and one of the aspects of that third point is what I call assertive vulnerability, because
I love that.
We've been trained in sort of a more feminine model of vulnerability or emotionality. And it's not a conspiracy, but what it is that really ever since the Industrial Revolution, when men had to go to work, leave the farm and, just 40, 60 hours at work, women stepped up, raised us, the teachers were women. So gradually the model for what it is to be emotional for a man has just skewed more towards the feminine, which is not entirely bad. That's part of we don't know how to do it. That's one. And we got to be macho. So the guy goes, I think more and more men are realizing that macho approach does not work. Does not work for them, does not work for women and society. But they don't know how to be vulnerable, how to be open and not be a snowflake, not to be soft and not be a woman or whatever. And because we have not ever seen men in this culture, with a few exceptions, behaving in this way. Our model for generations has been, by default, this more macho model, but more and more guys are waking up and they're coming to us either intentionally or consequently saying, there has to be a better way. Can you help me learn something that was never taught to me? And they're often coming because of two reasons. One, that the relationships aren't working like mine, and they love their partners, they love their family, and they're really trying, because guys don't do something. We don't go into something like a relationship or family unless we think you can win at it. So their intent's good, but it's like being told, I want to hire you to build my house, but You've never built a house. You don't have plans. You don't have tools. All you got is a hammer. You're not going to do too good of a job. And so these guys start to realize that really, I'm not the problem. It may be some trauma I have, but a lot of it's the system I grew up in. We really saw this when we were running the other company, and we did all this stuff virtual right when COVID came on. So we did these big virtual meetings with guys literally from all over the world, and we put them in Zoom breakout groups for 10, 15 minutes, and they'd come back and going, oh, I just told these guys things I've never told anyone. I mean, I'm closer to them in 15 minutes than I am to any guy, because they got to be real.
Yeah.
And so when we get to be real in an emotionally safe space, guys just open up naturally, because intrinsically or instinctually, we know how to do this if we are given permission and maybe have a little modeling or teaching around it.
Yeah, I love that, because it's really truly about learning to create the conditions under which we can connect more authentically and like you said, creating safety. So I'd like to come back to that particular topic now in terms of creating safety. Like what is it when you're facilitating a group, or, and this is, for the coaches and other people out there when they're in groups, what are the kinds of things now when you're leading the group, it's different because you can say, here are the rules for engagement. But what are the kinds of things that you're wanting to frame in for the capacity to create safety in a group?
Well, I think the first thing is we create those rules, which first is like confidentiality, and you can participate at any level you want. You can pass if you want. And so the pressure's taken off. And then the next thing is, and particularly if it's like a new group or training, I or one of the facilitators will model vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Right out of the gate, we say something that is authentic, vulnerable, that we would normally not say, that these guys can feel is a stretch for us. I've run out of things that I've never said.
I hear what you're saying.
But you get it. You say
I
something that's a
do.
little scary.
It's a little bit of a stretch, like you say.
Exactly. And the guys pick that up, because we all know that. And then they go, oh, it was Owen or Joe or Brett saying something that's vulnerable, and we're not making fun of them, or maybe it's safe. And then, guys just sort of ramp that up as we go through it pretty quickly, usually. And then we, give them some tools, because a lot of guys, and I was one of them, if you asked me what I felt emotionally, I just couldn't answer it, because I was so disconnected, sort of stuck in that disassociation, the freeze response. And as I became more aware of my body, or as these men became more aware of their somatic experience, they naturally were able to connect to their emotions. For a lot of guys, we just put them right into an experience around their bodies. And then it gets a lot easier to go, oh, I'm feeling my shoulders up. I'm sort of clenching my hands, and my jaw's a little tight. And, oh, I feel this tension in my solar plexus. I guess I'm feeling scared. Wow. I've never sort of connected those dots.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Just what you named there, that example of my body feels this way. And now that I'm looking at my body, that same neurology that's inspecting the quality of your experience can then sample the quality of your emotional, your limbic system response, which, you then realize, oh, these are associated sensations, And the key that I love here, because my big, thing I light up around is the languaging, right? Helping them give voice to that so that they can learn to express it. Now it's relational, and everybody else in the room that has that same sort of thing going on can go, oh, me too. And now you've got connection, collaboration, authenticity, vulnerability. And that's a beautiful way to set the frame. I
It
love
is,
that
and you
very
get this
much.
emotional synergy. And particularly for men, we want and need that. Maybe it's because we go out in hunting parties and just hang out together. But, most guys had that in school, maybe in the military, but most guys have lost that. And you get a little of that maybe with team sports, but to really be in a room with guys where they're just being vulnerable, real, laughing, teasing, but in a fun way. I mean, just being guys is huge. I mean, I've been doing these groups for 30 years, and I've always said, if you don't leave the group with more energy, something's wrong. I've only had a few
Yeah.
meetings where I didn't leave with more energy. Guys will come on, tired or low energy or maybe a little
Sure.
cold or stressed out, but just engaging with these other men, they leave with more energy. And there was probably still is, the joke in my group I started in Idaho, which, was a small town. And so I'd run into women that had men in the group that I didn't know, but they knew me. And they start really thanking me for how their husbands changed. And the joke was, well, it was the best night for sex because these guys would come home and they were
Suddenly this
present.
energy is, yeah.
Yeah, they were like, yeah, they were everything. They were open, they were present, they were attractive, and their girlfriends, wives were saying, "That's the guy I fell in love with. That's the guy I want." And yeah, we just don't have places to have that experience and let alone develop it.
Well, that's such an important key to the fact that the stress in our lives is, if you just think about it from a physics perspective, it's a high energy demand. And so our brains, our nervous systems are all kind of on, locked into this on position. And then when someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, hey, honey, how you doing?" Somebody you care about, you're not even close to being able to feel the goodness of that appreciation of someone caring about you. And that just takes away from the relationship. It takes away from the quality of your life. And then if you don't attend to that, the connection to those caring relationships will atrophy because it's not working for either of you. So, and the second part of that is like the moment you begin to relax and that energy begins to flow, it becomes available for what it would naturally want to do. So that's
Yeah, it's beautiful.
powerful.
I mean, yeah, and what it naturally wants to do is connect. I mean, we're hardwired for survival, but we're also hardwired for connection.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
my partner is a couples therapist. We do intensives, retreats. We're doing one in Costa Rica in a month. And, so we work with couples and I particularly work with the guys around what you just said is getting them down regulated, often by cheating, by getting them connected to their bodies. And one of the things we'll often do is we do a little teaching, and the couples go off and do a little exercise, and inevitably, a lot of the guys, he's really trying to communicate around this exercise, and you could just see and feel that the partner, the woman, or maybe a guy, the partner is getting more and more tense, and he's picking that up, and he's getting more tense, which makes him even worse. And so I sit next to John. I go, "Hey, John, can I help you?" He goes, "Yeah, please help me." And so what I do, when John wants me to help him, I just sort of start to feel what he's feeling and not speaking. And I start to communicate to his partner for like a minute, these emotional expressions. And she often starts to cry. And his eyes open up and his jaw drops because he goes, "Yeah, that's what I'm feeling." I go, "Yeah, John, you're feeling it. But here's the deal. You're not speaking it. You know it, but you don't know it somatically, you don't know it emotionally." And this is the problem I had. You're using emotional words, but when you really listen to it, what you're doing is you're analyzing, suggesting,
Yes.
judging, telling. It might sound like you're being emotional, but you're not. And
Hmm.
you can't create connection without an emotional expression that comes from an emotional experience.
So spot on in terms of the way that sometimes I lecture or teach about what are you connected to. And so when you're connected to your feeling and you speak from that place, then you come across authentically. But if you're connected to, well, I think I'm kind of angry, but I'm not really sure. It could be angry about this, but you're not connected to your anger. You're reporting about something, and it's just another abstraction at that point. When you really connect to it, it comes across completely different. Says, yeah, I think I'm kind of angry, you know, and it just changes everything. And then people can connect with you in a real way because you're being more fully embodied. But it's such powerful work, and particularly for men who are uncomfortable with that, and they need guidance and support. So I like it. You said, "Can I help you here?"
Was that guy. So I know how hard it is, and I know he loves her, and I know he's trying, but again, he just was never given the tools and never seen any guy do it.
Yeah, and where do you go? Where is, emotions for men 101 in the culture? We're taught to compete, to dominate, to own, to like conquerors and not collaborators. And the truth is, we want a little bit of both, and we want to be able to kind of switch hit so we can put in the role that we wish to be in and be comfortable with that. That's really challenging in these worlds. So we talked a little bit about a common denominator that we both had back in the day in Boulder, because I lived in Boulder too, and I think we crossed some of the same paths probably many times. And one of them was your experience with Hakomi and Ron Kurtz. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit because it's something we have in common, and because it's about somatic work. Now, if I got your story right, you had also been doing Rolfing in the same city, which is for those of you who haven't been involved with or know about Rolfing, it was really powerful, hands-on massage type of technique. I don't want to say it was massage because it was more than that, but it was hands-on work with the fascia. And I loved what you said earlier, that the fascia is the organ of anxiety. And fascia, for those of you that may not know, are like the connective tissues around the muscles and the rest of our organs that kind of, keep things lubricated, keep things sliding. It can get, like you mentioned, kind of like tight and not flexible. And that literally leads to inflexibility physically, but it's also, because we're organic systems, can lead to kind of congestion in the emotions and in the mind even. That's the way I understand it. And from my work, I would totally believe that's true. Which is kind of a long-winded way to say you were in there. That was your pre-staging for getting involved with, to some degree, with Ron Kurtz and Hakomi back in the day. And Hakomi is a somatic mindful psychotherapy approach. So I'd like to ask you, what did you take away from that kind of informed your process? Because he had some pretty unique stuff that he was doing.
He did. And we mentioned earlier that I was in his first professional training. There was a few of us in Boulder he sought out and said, yeah, come train with me. And I said, hell yeah. He taught me about mindfulness. I mean, I didn't really know about it. And so Ron, one of the ways I saw Ron work was that he was like a monk, or, he would stand you up and he would just get into this state and sort of be your mindfulness coach or whatever, where he would just, guide you through being more aware of what was happening in your body or your emotions that were, he could see, feel that was there, but you didn't know. And I remember, like, the first time he had this woman in our little group stand up and he asked her a few questions, and you could barely hear. I mean, he was just sort of being real slow, gentle and safe. And within a minute or two, she was sobbing on the floor. And it's like, what the heck happened here? And, and so he got our attention. So we studied that. And one of the things he did a lot of teaching about then, he didn't do later in his career, was he taught about all the body types and the evolution of these body types. And essentially what that meant, he didn't develop it, he just refined it. It first came from Reich, then Lowen, and Paracas, and then he added his stuff onto it. And I have his book that went out of print decades ago, and it's a manual with this, very elaborate chart. And what the chart was about is that depending on when your most severe trauma or disconnection or whatever that impact was in your life, it's going to impact your body structure, the quality of your tissue, how you move, and your emotions. There are like 7 to 8 different body types, some are like subtypes. And, if you had a trauma before birth or within the first year, you had this one kind of organizing, or you would say disorganizing way, versus the last one was, right around puberty. And you could predict how someone would behave, particularly under stress, by their body structure. And it's never been not true. There's a few times in my life I wish it wasn't true, and it proved to be true. And for me, it's always a great confirmation for my intuition. I get a feeling, and I'd step back and go, okay, yeah, he does have that sort of body type, and all right, then maybe I shouldn't trust him. Or that's how he's going to be oriented. And so that was one thing I got from Ron. But what I really got that ended up in my work now was this ability to, as he would say, go below the radar, go beyond the conscious mind, and go directly into your emotions through the body. And so when I started my group 20 years ago, I quickly realized I needed to develop a process that would take these men really deep, really quick, because I wanted to help them and I wanted to do something that was fun. So I developed what we now call the healing journey. And the core of that was some of Ron's work and then a lot of other stuff. And it was essentially what Ron was doing, what I thought I would never do. A guy would stand up, and I've done it in a room of 60 or more guys. I mean, some guy volunteers and everyone's standing around. And I ask him a few questions, and then he's crying or he's angry, and he's working out the trauma he didn't get to work out or experience. In other words, my little story of the deer, that when the deer got to run away or shake it off, run away, there was no PTSD. But say in this case, we're working with this man, maybe he's 7 years old, some kids beat him up, and he froze because that was really the only thing you could do. And it worked and it survived. But that trauma became a seed for many other things and a lot of other symptoms that he's probably trying to deal with, but not really able to deal with. So we take him back to that incident. And in this situation, he gets to do what he couldn't have done as a kid. He gets to fight and with pillows or whatever, he's fighting some guys, and he gets to physiologically, emotionally, verbally, relationally work this out through his body and his psyche, where that seed that was sort of dormant of having this ability to survive through a fight or flight, which is really taking action, he gets to do that. And that, we've had guys where we've done that thing, maybe it was a 20-30 minute process, and it was life-changing. And they've come back years later saying that, and I forget what it was because I've done so many of them, but they, of course, didn't. What you did for me in that experience has changed my life. And let me tell you what it's done.
That's beautiful. Ron Kurtz used to call something like that the missing experience. And he would also talk about it, and this is something I learned from lots of different trauma people, that a big part of trauma, now I want to be clear if people are listening, that trauma is not your typical sort of emotional woundedness. Trauma is a deeper wound than that. And so, but often, and he told these amazing stories about how trauma would happen to people, but they almost all involve not being able to complete the natural organic action that would want to occur. So you get held down while someone beats you up, or you're in a car wreck and you can't move while somebody next to you passes away. And these things can leave very deep marks on people because you are inhibited in some way from moving through what would naturally happen, like running up and getting away, or going to get help, or no one coming to help you. Those are the kinds of things that can help a trauma not happen in the exact same circumstances. So helping people through those experiences is exceptionally powerful work.
And that sometimes it happened organically in the Rolfing session, or sometimes, like with me, it happened in like the 3rd to my 9th month after my Rolfing. I mean, I didn't have micros of those as my body let go, but that's the freeze response. We stay in that freeze response. We stay disassociated. We're frozen in inaction, but the stress is still there, and then it gets stored in our body, and we can't understand where we're tight. Like one quick little story. I had many decades ago, a gentleman that was in special forces who was leading his platoon into an ambush, a village behind enemy lines, and they got ambushed. And he had this chronic hip problem that no one could fix. So I'm working on his adductors, which is the upper muscles on the inside of legs, and he starts to have this trauma release, shaking, crying, trembling, moaning, everything. Comes back next week, hip is completely fine. Always, it stays fine. And he tells me this story that he's, going to get ambushed this village, and they get ambushed, and he had to break the neck of a 12-year-old boy.
God, that's horrible.
But he couldn't deal with it because he had to take care of his men and do everything else. So it stayed in his body and actually went into his, adductors, and then went into his hip. And until it got released, he had these chronic hip problems. It's like, I teased him beforehand. It was like your leg or your hip was in there backwards. And after the emotional charge got to release, after, as you said, you got to complete it, it was done.
Yeah. So after he got to complete that, so this, I mean, I'm imagining that the 12-year-old was like part of the assault, like it was a life-threatening scenario, and he had to like protect himself. And
Yes.
so he really, oh my gosh, yeah, what a horrible situation to be in.
And
That's
and and many of us have been in horrible situations, but most of us have had micro situations. So you can have a minor situation that gets repeated and have the same or more trauma from it than one incident. And so often,
mhm.
guys think, well, nothing much happened, because we've worked with special ops guys, and and everyone knows that they've seen trauma, they've given it, received it, all that, and they'll often say to the other guys, you know, just because you weren't in combat doesn't mean you weren't traumatized. And sometimes the biggest traumas are the ones that are the subtlest. And now with attachment theory, we often talk about the trauma of not having connection. We don't think about
Yeah.
that, but when you don't have secure attachment or connection, that is stressful or traumatic. And your body and your mind or your emotions adjust to that. And you do what you have to as a kid, but then you keep doing it. And that's the limitation of it.
Right. It becomes just part of your, you organically adapt to your environment, and that adaptation helps you get through your situation, but it doesn't work for you later on. But still, you have that adaptation. And so consequently, it's a becomes a limiting factor in your life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you got a coping mechanism, which was a survival response. And I said, look, it worked. No shame. It worked. But right
Mhm.
now, you're still using the same tool, and it's not the right tool, but it's not your
Right.
fault.
Yeah, I tell that to myself because, and other people as well. It's kind of like whatever you did to get through your crappy childhood or your stressful situation, you got through. And the fact that you're talking to me now and that you still have this part of you that wants to be a good person, a whole person in the world, shows that you got through relatively intact, that this good part of you is still alive and wants to thrive. And so, yay. Now it's a matter of, how do I reinform, update the files of the computer, where you say it, to kind of like say, hey, I've got a new system scenario now. But their nervous system just associates certain stimulus with certain experiences, whether you like it to or not, because that's what the nervous system does. And so consequently, you wind up with inappropriate responses to current stimuli based on past learning. So pretty powerful sets of understanding there. So let me ask you this. It's like whenever the men who come to your group, what are the kinds of resistances that you might encounter, and how do you kind of help them, or do you kind of help them kind of like learn to do this more authentic turning inward?
Well, part of what we've done is that we can sort of give them a model, because as guys, if we have an intellectual model that accommodates these new experiences, it makes it easier and safer. So we use what I call the SomaWare model, which I created, which is essentially a emotional physiological model, and a lot of it comes from the polyvagal theory. And so they go, okay, that makes sense. And sort of like we're saying now, okay, I've had stress and trauma, and it's gone into my body, and and that physiology affects my emotions, and all right, that all makes sense. So that just sort of loosens them up. It sort of tenderizes them. And then we just start really slow and gentle, often with a somatic meditation. And I'm often surprised how powerful that can be for some men.
The
I'll
somatic
do it.
meditation meaning like notice what it feels like. What do your feet feel like on the floor? What's it like for you to
Exactly.
breathe? Like those, yeah.
Or a body scan, just, slowly walking through their body. Because one of the things I've done over the years was another business, and a partner in this business. We were the John Kabat-Zinn's first company ever doing his course, which is the mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And yeah, it was hugely successful, and it was down
Yeah,
to
huge.
teenagers.
It's the gold. It's
I
the
mean,
gold
my partner
standard.
still, ex-partner, still doing it. We didn't make a lot of money on it, but we helped a lot of people, and we were getting a lot of referrals from the hospitals and doctors that were saying, "Look, we can't help you, but these guys can." And it was really slowly getting them aware of the body. And one of the geniuses of John was, it was like a 45-minute tape. Back then it was cassette tapes that they had to listen to. And it was 8 weeks, but for at least 4 or 6 weeks, it was a body scan. So all they were doing was just listening to my voice or his voice, talking through the body. Really simple, really passive, but I was surprised at how powerful it was for these people, because as they got connected to the body, they downregulate, their emotions would come up. I remember I had one guy who was a VP for a big company in Phoenix, and he was this Irish guy, great sense of humor, high stress, heart conditions because of the stress. His doctor sent him to us. And then like halfway through the course, he comes back in one day and he says, this morning I was so pissed. I ripped the buttons off my shirt because I was buttoning it wrong. I got pissed and I tore the shirt. I said, great. And he went, what? Great? I said, yeah, John, you've been holding that anger, that stress and frustration in you and your body for years. That's why you're hypertensive. Now you're starting to feel it and release it. So yeah, you ruined a good shirt. Better your shirt than your life. And he went, yeah. And that was like the turnaround for him. And so, particularly with guys, giving them some kind of experience of that connection of their body and their emotion is always a door opening experience.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful, because the disconnect is so huge that just the fact that you invite people to do that is a neurological invitation for the brain to kind of like to rediscover what it used to know. Because, as children, we're all pretty somatic, we're all pretty hardwired to that. But we get talked out of it or injured out of it. I know myself, I had to get pretty hardcore because I grew up in a pretty tough world where, I could be beat up and people could abuse you, and you were kind of at risk all the time of running into the wrong people. And so you learn to kind of be hypervigilant, and, you kind of bulk up because you might have to fight your way out of something. It was tough. And it leads to a level of kind of disconnection, because it wasn't until I was in college that I realized I was hypervigilant about just walking down the street. I noticed one day I was like, because I had taken karate, and I noticed that this guy was coming down the sidewalk on a bicycle, just minding his own business. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, I need to be over here, because if this happens, then I can throw him this way. And I'm organizing around a conflict that's completely imaginary. And I thought, I don't want to live like that. I don't want to be in a world of imagining every passerby as a fight. And that was a big turning point for me.
Yeah, that would be. And, you probably felt a connection to your body, and you realized that as you said, out of your survival necessity, you had to see everything as a threat.
Yeah. Yeah. And that worked. I managed to live and get out of there. And it was helpful, because after a certain point in time, that wasn't an issue. But I was still living in that world, even though I wasn't there anymore. Sometimes I like to think about, what if, for men, but in the culture, what if we grew up in a culture where we had each other's backs instead of teaching each other to be at each other's throats? You know what I mean? Like, it really, I have somatic sadness about just speaking that. I'm like, what a huge missed opportunity. I just, appreciate the work that you're doing so much, and the people that you're helping. Just what's next for you? How can people reach you, and what's your vision of where you're going with this work?
Well, yeah, like I said, I didn't think this would be my mission, but it certainly is now. It found me. I didn't find it.
What did you think was going to be your mission?
Well, I had a very successful clinic and Rolfing practice. And then, I thought that was it, because I felt really fortunate. I fell into that at an early age, really loved it, went home every night, really appreciative of what I was doing, because it was making a huge difference in people's lives. So I thought that was it. And I thought, I had it. Well, this sort of grabbed me, and it just keeps sucking me in, which is great. So what we're doing with MELD, and it's, MELD.community, is, we're really changing the model of, you could say, masculinity. That's a word I don't usually use, and the culture uses, or media and academia does, but guys don't use that word. But really, what it is to be a man, and we're giving men tools that they never had, and with that, a model. and giving men an opportunity to support each other, to have each other's backs. Because guys will come to our experiences or groups because they have a challenge, an issue, maybe a relationship, or they want to change their purpose or what's next in their life. And they get the traction with that, but they stay in their group or maybe with us because they want to keep connecting. They're really tight with these guys. And they realize that showing up for this group every week is a contribution that they get to give to other men that they don't have that opportunity in any other place in their life. Just being real and authentic is a contribution for someone else. So that's huge. And I didn't realize that too in the beginning. So to support all that and to really further propagate this whole mind-body connection and just give people in general that awareness and those tools to really use our stress physiology, not as a way that harms us, but as a way that heals us and connects us. Sort of get out of our battles that we have of dualities and disconnections and, he's right, or he's wrong, I'm right. And getting people just more connected on a more fundamental level. And what I had a teacher once say that the ultimate battle we have is between the sexes. And maybe that's true that, when we can start to connect to ourselves and connect to the people close to us, as you said, like have our backs, so many of these other problems start to dissolve away. And so we get guys in our trainings or groups from all different ages, professions, educations, political, religious orientations, and none of that comes up. None of it matters. We don't have those discussions. We're just guys. And if we could have all that in our communities, we wouldn't have all the strife that we have. And it wouldn't be so easy for media or anyone else to propagate further disconnections because we would be connected.
Yeah. That's so powerful what you just said there, that it becomes, once you discover the power and authenticity of authentic connection, that other people, it becomes something you defend. It's kind of like, I'm not going to let people take away the value of that because this is the real deal. This is what matters. This is what's true. So that's really important because there are a lot of forces in the world that would seem to encourage us to kind of be less caring and be a little meaner.
Right. And with that, they keep us in a stress state, which allows us to be manipulated. But when you're relaxed and connected, the stress often just sort of washes off of you. And because where you can get connected or down regulate and reset yourself. So what we do with MELD, we have several things. We have a really powerful and fun 10-week introduction course that they did a 2-year study with these scientists or researchers, and that was recently published in the big APA, American Psychological Association journal.
Nice.
Analyzing and just sort of deconstructing this whole training and seeing the value of it and the difference it makes for men. So that's a great introduction with guys to get into some of the things that we talked about. And guys are amazed at how easy and how much fun that is. And that's a 10-week course that I first designed 10 years ago, but I don't lead. And the guy that leads it is actually better at it than I would be. And I have a 12-week all hands dive group coaching that I do. It's a unique method that I developed that has been proven to be real powerful, and guys really get the power of my coaching, which is always more powerful in a group. But my other groups are just peer-to-peer. So it's a different kind of setup. And then we have our what we call Prime Retreat, which is this retreat I first developed probably 8 years ago that, I've done, just short of 20 of them all over North America. And it's what I realized in all my work with people, there's a general arc or change. And it can show up in one of these healing journeys in the course of 20 minutes, or it can show up over a course of a couple of years. But there's a natural progression that I think it's intrinsic in all of us. So I sort of extracted that out. And what I do, or what we do, is we go through that progression. We learn one step, we teach a little, we demo it, and then you're there with 2 other guys and you work on each other. and one after another. And it's this natural progression. And we do that over a course of a long weekend. And it's life changing
Nice.
for some guys because they get
Yeah, I
to
can
not only
imagine
get
so.
this healing, but they realize that in using this technology, they can have this impact on someone else. Plus, they get really connected because it's such an authentic experience, and it's in a
Mm,
natural or beautiful and comfortable setting. And and then guys go, "Hey, yeah, I want to take this work to my community and do a group, or I want to study this more." And so we have a professional training that we teach coaches. So we have a little of everything, and then yes, because we started with groups, support men in developing what they need to have a successful group. So we have a free membership and free things that we give guys to help them with a group. Yeah, and we got guys that have been in groups that I helped start directly, indirectly, for as long as I've been doing these things. And I had a guy I spoke to a couple hours ago that did some of my trainings. It was life changing for him, and he he had a startup. He did a $10 million fundraise for that startup. His clients were things like companies like Apple. And he said what he learned from me ended up changing his life. We'll go into all this ways of how,
beautiful.
but that, it
And helped him be more successful.
yeah, and now he teaches or coaches guys, and he other startup entrepreneurs, and shows them what you were saying before about it's not about how hard or how fast or how much you can go, because he gives his stories of how he was his worst enemy, all the mistakes he made in his business because he was stressed out, he was scared, all the things that he wouldn't be now, but he had no support, and he worked hard. He's a bright guy, but he was sabotaging himself. And he now helps guys not do that. But again,
Beautiful.
he didn't have that training, but he
Yeah.
wants to have men have that training.
And so, that's a super powerful way to like take the work that you've done on yourself, and that translates into the organizations that you're part of. And then that therefore helps the people that are part of that. And in that way it gets amplified and spread. So this is the way we save the world in a way. It's kind of like helping people in powerful ways. It's one of the reasons I do this podcast, is to help people hear about this work, like the work that you're doing. And many of the coaches that we interview are doing powerful work, touching people one person at a time, leading to a giant thing. Sometimes I say, together we are a mighty force, and that's one of the things that I really want to leave people with, is there's a lot of powerful work going on. And we need that work now more than ever in these crazy times. So I just wanted to say thank you, Owen, for showing up and being a part of the work of helping people become better people, and specific focus on men's issues. Really powerful. And kudos for all the success that you've had, and the many people that you've helped along the way. So we will put all your notes into all these connections and links into the show notes so that people can reach out to you. And so just one final question is, like, if some guy is out there listening and what would you say, like, how can you begin to really come to terms with the impact of the messaging about, you've got to be the dominant paradigm everywhere you go, and you realize that that's just kind of crushing you? What's a takeaway for that person?
That you're good enough. We did a study, a big study several years ago with the guys, in our network. And what the researcher found was the most consistent thing, and pretty much with every guy, was that, and I can relate to this, that, we don't feel good enough, which is one reason that we work so hard and we're, spinning our wheels. And so that you're good enough. And the other one is that you're not alone, or you don't need to be alone. Like I
Beautiful.
said, with COVID, and we get these guys coming on from all over the world, realizing that they weren't the only one, that, because guys start saying their experience, and then they realize, oh, me too.
Mm-hmm.
So we hold on to this. So you're good enough, and you're not alone, and you don't, and go get some help, and you can turn it around. I mean, you're hardwired. Not only are you to survive and connect, but you're hardwired to heal. And with the right support,
Yeah.
your body has the intelligence to be able to do that.
So thank you, Owen. It's great talking to you. So people, reach out to him, find out about his work, connect, go to the retreat. It's going to be amazing. And then if you're interested in, tips and tricks and insights and practices of mindful communication, go over to themindfulcoach.com and check out my new offering over there as well. So thanks once again. It's been great talking to you.
The Mindful Coach Podcast is a service of the Mindful Coach Association.